everyone, Cindy Cluett from Beyond the House. I am currently in McDougall Park, which I hold very close to my heart. We maintain McDougall Park as a donation to Russell and to the Horticultural Society, so I love this space. And today I'm taking the opportunity. We are planting a tree in memory of Pat Station, who was a longtime member of the Horticultural Society. And what I'd like to do is go through all the steps of how to plant a tree, how to select the right tree, and all of that stuff. So we often get asked, how do you plant a tree? So we do have it all written down on a sheet at the store, but I think it's good for us to have a video as well. So I'm going to start with selecting the right tree for the right place. Now, anybody who knows trees would look at this and go, oh, that's an eastern redbud, that's not hardy here. And it's not very hardy here, that is correct. But in McDougall Park, I think we've kind of reached, it's a microclimate, so I can get away with a lot here. I have a metasequoia right over there called Gold Rush, and that is not a tree that you commonly see in places. So we kind of have this little, it's a beautiful little space. We have a tulip tree in McDougall Park. We have all kinds of fun things, and it's my play place. So I'm going to plant an eastern redbud because it's going to produce those beautiful hot pink blooms in the spring. I am selecting this location in particular though because I know that eastern redbuds are not tolerant to salt. And I've got the road right here, and I know that when the snowplow comes by in the wintertime, they're going to be dumping snow on the gardens, and I originally wanted to have it in the garden, but I know I'm too close there. So we're moving it back a little bit, and it'll be more sheltered and more protected here from the salt. So when you select a tree to plant in a specific location at your house, check what's going on around you. Make sure that you have enough space for it. This guy it's a small shrub-like tree, so it's not going to get very big. I have ample room here for it to grow properly. And I also, one thing that people forget to do is to look up. And if you look up and you see a telephone wire or a hydro wire, be conscious of that. Understand that your tree, you don't want it to actually hit the hydro wires, and then you have hydro come by and they end up having to top the tree because it's too tall. It's a common mistake that's made, and unfortunately it ends up shortening the lifespan of a tree. Check out your sun exposure. Make sure that you have enough light for the type of tree that you're growing. Check out your wind exposure. If it's a tree that is susceptible to wind burn or just needs a bit more shelter, don't pop it in a spot that's going to be bright and windy. So all of these things need to be kept in mind. The soil. If you're sitting in a sopping wet place, make sure that you're not planting a tree that can handle wet feet. So this is why when you come to the garden center, we like taking a lot of time with you and ask you 1,000,001 questions about what kind of tree you want, where it's going, and what kind of conditions it will be planted in. It's worth taking the time to investigate everything properly so that when you plant a tree, it is there for a very long time as opposed to needing to be cut down in 5 to 10 years, which would be too bad because it's a lot of work to plant a tree properly. So I'm going to go over trees. The way things were grown up to the 1970s, trees were grown out in the field. They were dug up in the spring and they were sold bare root. When things were done that way, garden centers were only able to sell trees in the spring and in the fall when they were dormant. You couldn't have a bare root tree with leaves on it, it would die. So we had to sell trees when they were dormant, and people would plant them when they were dormant. And that's why everybody thinks you can only plant in the spring and in the fall. After that, they came up with container production, so to increase the ability for garden centers to sell trees all through the season. And with that came another problem that we've kind of figured out over the years. So trees get dug up in the spring in the nurseries, and then after that they get put in a pot. In order for the tree to be able to stand up in the pot, just pull this guy out. So a tree gets, you can see here, the tree is almost like a stump in the pot. That's because it ends up getting placed too deep in the pot and then backfilled in order for it to stand up in the pot. This is all for garden center sales, basically, is why this is happening. So what is going on now in the landscape, if you take a look at your tree and you don't see the trunk flare, and if you go back to when you drew a tree as a kid, there was always a flare. You always did, exactly the same type of line with the flare at the bottom. There's many trees in the landscape that have been planted in the last 30 or so years that have been planted too deep. And what this causes is rot around the trunk, and there's not enough oxygen that gets down to the root system, so we have these long-term problems with trees. So the first thing that you're going to do when you take your tree out of the pot is determine how deep of a hole you need to dig. And the only way you can do that is by taking it out of the pot. So don't look at your pot and think that's the depth of your hole, okay? You really only want to go to the depth of the finished root ball. So as I scrape this away, I'm going to find my trunk flare. And I'm going to open this up. All of these roots on the surface are really superficial roots. They're not heavy duty roots. I'm not hurting the tree by doing this. I'm making it a little cranky, but I'm not hurting it. And sometimes, you know, kids have to be cranky in order to be happy in the long run. But as you can see here, this is wet, and this was planted too deep in the pot. So we don't want to go, this is kind of where I'm trying to get down to some real roots. And as you can see, I'm actually taking off almost an entire layer of roots. And if you can see this, there's a root that's coming across here. What's going to happen if I didn't take these roots off? They would end up wrapping around the tree, and eventually these roots grow like the trunk grows. A root is basically an extension of the tree, and it grows with annual year rings. And as it grows out, it's going to end up cutting into the trunk as the trunk grows out, and one is going to cut into the other. Well, the root will cut into the trunk and end up girdling your tree over the years. So this is another problem. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that when this tree was put in the pot, it started growing. The roots started growing out in all directions. Once the root hits the side of the plastic pot, it will start going around and around and around. So roots will continue growing around in these circles until you tell them to stop growing in those circles. Okay, so you have to make sure that you open up that root system and tell it which direction you want it to grow in. And that's out. We do not want to have this perfect ball. And that's why it's so important to make sure that your hole is 2 to 3 times the width of the root ball. So you have to give that tree enough space so that when you plant it, you're actually flaring out the root system. Okay, so I'm just going to open this guy up. And I know I understand that everybody, you know, that you would be concerned that you're hurting the tree, but this is for long-term good as opposed to, you know, it's going to be a little cranky at first, but it's going to be a good thing for the tree overall. Keep in mind, I am doing this with a wet root ball. I water this tree heavily at least a full hour before you decide to plant your tree. Make sure that tree is good and wet. You do not want to rip open roots that are dry. You'll end up damaging those root system, the whole root system quite severely. So I'm going to keep going here, and you just kind of get your fingers in there and you feel for which direction the roots are going in. But see, these roots were going in this way. If I didn't open this up, it would continue doing this, grow, grow, grow. This is going to grow, one is going to cut the other, and the tree will end up being not happy in a few years. So there's another root. So I'm just telling all these guys, go out in this direction. Don't hurt the main trunk. Okay, so now that I've done that, now I've determined this is the finished height of my root ball. Now I'm just going to lay this guy down gently, and I'm going to keep going with telling these roots to go in the right direction. So all of these big roots, sometimes it takes a while to find the start and stop of these guys. But see, this was a big root, and now I'm telling it to go out this way. So you know that your hole has to be at least this wide. So I'll keep opening up the root system, and then I'm going to get working on the hole, and we'll come back in a little while. It's quite dry in the ground right now, so it's going to take a while to dig the hole, but we'll be back shortly to finish showing you how to plant the tree.